Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is titled, Why is Weird Bad? That is something I have genuinely never understood. We live in a society where people are constantly describing other people as weird, and most of the time they do not mean it as a neutral observation. They mean it as an insult. Someone talks differently, behaves differently, has unusual interests, expresses themselves differently, or simply does not follow the same social patterns as everyone else, and suddenly they are labeled weird. But what exactly is so bad about that? Most of the time, when people call someone weird, what they really mean is that the person is not behaving according to whatever that particular group considers normal. You are not talking the way they expect you to talk. You are not acting the way they expect you to act. You are not interested in the same things. You might react differently, dress differently, communicate differently, or simply have a personality they are not accustomed to. None of those things automatically make someone bad. Being different from what somebody else expects is not the same thing as being harmful, disrespectful, dishonest, or cruel. Those are completely different issues. That is why I have never understood why weird automatically gets attached to something negative. If being weird simply means that you do not completely conform to what society considers normal, then I do not see why that should automatically be treated like some kind of character flaw. Everybody has their own way of behaving. Everybody has their own personality, habits, interests, mannerisms, and ways of expressing themselves. And if we are being realistic, every single person probably does something that somebody else would consider weird. You could take almost anyone on earth, observe them long enough, and eventually find something about them that another person would describe as strange. Maybe it is the way they talk when they get excited. Maybe it is the music they listen to. Maybe it is the things they collect. Maybe it is their sense of humor. Maybe it is how they relax when nobody else is around. There is always going to be something. So if everyone has something unusual about them, why are we pretending that being weird is some terrible thing? I was thinking about this recently while watching a YouTube video. It was an ASMR video where the person making the video was creating different sounds into a microphone to help people relax. At one point, she started making certain sounds and said something along the lines of, Sorry if this gets a little weird. And my immediate reaction was, Who cares if it gets weird? That is the entire point. She was making an ASMR video. The sounds were being made intentionally because some people find those sounds relaxing. Maybe someone who has never watched ASMR before would think it looks strange. But why should that require an apology? Why have we reached a point where somebody feels like they have to apologize because another person might consider what they are doing unusual? That is what I find strange about the whole situation. People sometimes seem genuinely uncomfortable with anything that falls outside their personal definition of normal. The moment something feels unfamiliar, they label it weird. Then, somewhere along the way, weird becomes bad. I would rather be weird than spend my life constantly adjusting myself to fit whatever other people happen to consider normal. I have talked about this subject before, including in other videos, because I think there is another important part of the conversation that people overlook. What one person considers weird might be completely normal to somebody else. That alone should tell us something. If weirdness were some objective characteristic that a person either possessed or did not possess, everybody would agree about what was weird. But we do not. One person might look at something and think it is bizarre, while another person sees absolutely nothing unusual about it. Someone's personality might seem strange in one social group and completely ordinary in another. A hobby could be considered weird in one country, common in another country, unusual among one generation, and completely normal among another generation. That is why I have never completely understood the obsession with labeling people this way. Being weird is not automatically a bad thing. You should not have to apologize simply because your personality does not match somebody else's expectations. There is a quote from Dr. Phil that I have always liked. Be who you are on purpose. Whatever you think about the person saying it, there is something useful in that idea. Do not spend your entire life reacting to the world by constantly asking yourself what version of you will receive the least criticism. Do not become fake simply because you are afraid somebody might think the genuine version of you is strange. That does not mean you should never think about your behavior. Obviously, you should think before you speak. You should think before you act. You should use common sense. You should understand that your actions affect other people. There is a difference between saying, I am going to be myself, and using that statement as an excuse to behave badly. Being yourself does not remove responsibility. But if you are not hurting anyone, disrespecting anyone, or doing something genuinely wrong, then being different should not automatically become something you need to correct. Be the person you genuinely believe you are supposed to be. Do not allow yourself to be held back simply because you are not behaving exactly the way somebody else thinks you should behave. Who gives a thung if somebody thinks that makes you weird? There is another part of this that matters as well. Even our definition of normal changes constantly. Things go in and out of style. Social expectations change, culture changes, language changes, fashion changes, technology changes, relationships change, entertainment changes. Think about what society looked like 50 years ago. There were things people considered completely normal back then that would seem strange today. There are also things that are considered completely normal today that people 50 years ago might have considered bizarre. So, what happens 50 years from now? We have no idea. Something somebody mocks today as strange could become completely ordinary in the future. That is another reason I find these labels so meaningless. People love creating categories. This is weird, this is normal. That person is weird, this person is normal. They repeat those classifications as if there is some official rule book somewhere defining exactly how human beings are supposed to behave. There is not. And even when something is unusual, why does unusual have to mean bad? Maybe you are not used to somebody behaving a certain way. Fine. You are allowed to find it unusual. But unfamiliarity is not the same thing as wrongdoing. We have also become a society where people seem to apologize for almost everything. Sometimes people apologize before they have even done anything. Sorry if this sounds weird. Sorry if this question is weird. Sorry if I am being weird. Why? If you are doing something harmless, why immediately place yourself in a defensive position because somebody else might not understand you? I am not going to apologize simply for behaving in a way somebody else does not understand. If I actually hurt somebody, disrespect somebody, or do something wrong, that is different. Then there might be something worth apologizing for. But merely existing outside somebody else's definition of normal is not something that requires an apology. People are people. Some people are loud, some are quiet, some are serious, some are eccentric, some communicate differently, some have unusual interests, some have personalities that take a little longer to understand. Sometimes people simply are a certain way. That does not automatically make them bad people. You are not a bad person simply because you act differently from what other people expected. And when you really think about it, I am not even convinced that weird exists in the way people pretend it does. Weirdness is largely something created in the human mind. One person decides that a behavior falls outside their personal understanding of normal, labels that behavior weird, and then applies that label to another person. Somebody else could observe the exact same behavior and think absolutely nothing of it. So, where does the weirdness actually exist? Most of the time, it exists in the judgment of the person observing you. They create an idea in their mind about what normal behavior should look like, compare you against that standard, and decide whether you fit inside it. If you do not fit, you become weird. But that does not mean there is actually something wrong with you. It means somebody formed an expectation and you did not match it. That is a very different thing. I do not want to keep repeating the same argument because I think the point is fairly simple. People are people. You should think before you speak. You should think before you act. You should use common sense, understand consequences, and take responsibility when your behavior genuinely affects somebody else. But outside of that, allow yourself to be who you are. If somebody thinks you are weird because you do not fit their expectations, let them think it. You cannot spend your entire life trying to satisfy every person's definition of normal because those definitions are different everywhere you go. What makes perfect sense to one person can seem strange to another. What seems normal today might seem ridiculous 50 years from now. What somebody considers weird today might be exactly what somebody else appreciates about you. So do what you need to do, be who you need to be. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Signing out. Have a good one, guys. Goodbye for now.